So a lot of writers construct their characters backwards. And what I mean by that is they start with details about that character, right? Hair color, eye color, what they look like, their clothing, and then they might get on to like personality and stuff like that. And only at the end of that process do they really grapple with the essential part of what makes a character human. They grapple with questions like, what does this character believe about others? Like, what does this character believe about God or the world or their purpose for existence? Like, big picture type of stuff. I'm going to argue that that process that pretty much all writers use is the wrong way of building a character. It's completely backwards. Because I think when you start with details and then you go towards core beliefs, a lot of the time you don't reach all the way to core beliefs, or like the core beliefs end up being sort of fuzzy. And so what you end up with is a very hollow character, a character that does not feel real. I believe you should construct characters in a completely different way. You should start with their core belief, like a very small phrase that establishes something central about what they believe as a character, and then you go from there to lead to all the details about their life. Now, a core belief can be something like people always leave, or don't trust people in power. And then once you discover that core belief of your character, you take it and you use it to determine their choices and their behavior and their appearance and everything else. So here's an example. Say you have a character whose core belief is you must be perfect to be loved. It's relatable. I feel like it's very common, but if we take that core belief, I think we can spin off from there what this character is going to look like. That core belief gives you an indication or a hint of what their appearance might be like. Say they dress immaculately because they believe they have to be perfect in order to be loved. That belief will manifest itself in the speech patterns as well. This is likely to be a character who speaks very carefully and very measuredly because they're afraid of saying something wrong, because if they say something imperfect, then people won't love them. This belief manifests in their personality. They're probably more risk adverse, right? Because they're frightened of what might happen. They might also be compulsively organized, have a very neat existence. This kind of belief can also give you clues about the character's backstory. Let's say they had parents who were highly critical of every single thing that they did, and that's how they became this way. And lastly, a core belief like this helps you figure out, what is this character's relationships going to be like? Well, maybe they have difficulty accepting praise because they don't believe they are perfect enough. Now, if you're thinking of a character of yours right now and you're like, I don't know what their core belief is, let me give you a few more examples of core beliefs that hopefully should spark some imaginative juices. Power is the only way to ensure safety. Love always leads to betrayal. Family loyalty comes before all else. Now, hopefully that helps you with some ideas, but if none of those work for your character, I have a process that I take authors through that helps them discover what the core belief of the character is. Because trust me, I know, it's hard to just come up with a core problem out of the blue. You're just like, I don't know how to do that. So hold on, let me take you through this process. I'm going to help you find your character's core beliefs by asking you to come up with their unspoken rule. So every character needs at least one arbitrary rule that they absolutely refuse to break. And I think if you can come up with what that unspoken rule is, it's often something that leads you to their core belief. Now, a little word of caution here. I don't think you want a really obvious unspoken rule, something like, I don't kill people. Well, unless you're in the military, I think that's sort of taken for granted, right? Most characters aren't being like, my rule is to murder people. Unless you're writing a character like Dexter, right? I mean, there are exceptions. In Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, Stevens the butler has this unspoken rule about he never presents his own opinions to others. He never deflects, he never speaks up, and this is even when his employer is entertaining literal Nazis. Nazis are at his dining table, and he doesn't speak up and tell his employer you sure about that? But that unspoken rule of not revealing his personal opinions tells us something very important about his core belief. He believes he's not worthy to speak up. He believes his opinions don't matter. He believes that genteel society and politeness and maintaining his job as a butler is more important than confronting someone who's in league with the Nazis. In many ways, this is the perfect attitude for a butler, so self-effacing, so willing to be invisible to sort of help someone else fulfill their goals. So the question is, what is your character's one unspoken rule? The one rule they really will refuse to break, even if there are really good reasons to break it. And once you come up with that rule, then you can come up with, okay, if they won't break that rule, what does that say about their core belief? What do they really believe about the world? Once you have a core belief of your character, you need to do some work to make it a contradictory core belief. In other words, you need to find a situation where your character's core belief is running up against a situation that gives them all the reason in the world to break that core belief. And that's because core beliefs, they're really not dramatic until they come into tension with something else. Let's say you have a character whose core belief is, money doesn't buy happiness. That's not very interesting until you reveal that they are a workaholic and spending way too much time at work. Or look at an example like Don Draper from Mad Men. On one hand, he preaches all the time about authenticity in advertising. He turns down clients if he doesn't think they're the right fit. He tries to be honest and straightforward with clients. But then on the other hand, in his personal life, he is a master of deception. He keeps so many secrets. He cheats on his wife. So his core belief about honesty and straightforwardness at work is at odds with how he lives his personal life. Another choice is to have your character's core belief challenged by a deep desire. Look at Shiv Roy from the series Succession. Here is a woman who has such a core belief about her independence and capability to run this massive organization without anyone else's help. And yet she so desperately wants her father's validation and approval. That is an excellent contradiction between her core beliefs and what she really wants. Okay, so you used an unspoken rule to come up with your character's core belief. You also made that belief contradictory in some way, gave it a little bit more attention. The next step is to use that core belief to figure out several things about your character. Specifically, we're going to focus on three things: backstory, actions, and personality. Let's start by using that core belief to create your character's backstory. Let's start with a fun example: Bruce Wayne in Batman. Right? Let's say his core belief is that chaos and crime can be controlled through strength and fear. So the question is, what is an event in his backstory that could lead him to a belief like that? Well, as you probably know, witnessing his parents' murder in what comes to be known as Crime Alley is the perfect recipe to make him believe a core belief like that. Let's look at another example by Thomas Harris. His most famous book is Silence of the Lambs, and you know his character, Hannibal Lecter. I would say that his core belief is the powerful prey on the weak, so become the predator. So if that is his core belief, what is the backstory that would lead him to that belief? Well, it's got to be some sort of sense of powerlessness, all right, of being hunted by others, and we do see that in his backstory. During World War II, his sister Misha was both killed and eaten by starving Nazi soldiers. That is the origin story of his cannibalism. That is the origin story of his feeling of helplessness and yet wanting to master that helplessness by becoming a predator. Now, I know the examples I'm giving of backstory are very much like one-to-one correlations, and it's very easy to see the connection. I don't think it has to be that way. I think your backstories can be a lot more complex and nuanced. It's difficult to give examples of those types of things, but I think it's important for you to know that you have a lot of different options with backstory. It doesn't have to be a precise example of trauma that leads to your character believing a core belief. But now let's move on to another stage of using your core beliefs to create your character's actions. Because belief by itself is undramatic, right? You don't get to a story through a belief. But I think belief is often the driving force that determines what your characters do in your book. So in Cormac McCarthy's The Road, you could characterize the father's core belief as protecting innocence is the only moral duty we have left. Okay, so how does that manifest itself in an apocalyptic wasteland? 1, he goes without food so he can give more to his son. 2, he tries to keep secrets from his son, including not telling him that, he's coughing up blood and that it's very likely he's going to die very soon. And 3, he is willing to kill others in order to protect the innocence of his son. If you as an author can identify the core belief of your character, you can map out what needs to happen in your book, what actions your character needs to take to make sense of them as a person. If the father did not do all those things to protect the innocence of his son, he would not be as memorable of a character as he really is. I'll also add in this section that you can come up with actions that go against the core belief. For instance, maybe your character has a very strong core belief about the sanctity of life, but they find themselves itself in a scenario with maybe someone who's very old and euthanasia starts to become an option to them because they're in so much pain. The tension between the core belief and what seems to be the right option is going to do wonders for your book. The next step is to use your character's core belief in order to establish your character's personality. And by personality, I'm just talking about like the temperament and like how your character interacts with other people. For an example, let's look at Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. So one of her core values, and this isn't her only core value, but I'd say it's one of the stronger ones, is academic excellence and the pursuit of knowledge. So if that's her core belief, how does that manifest itself in her personality? Well, she can be very intense. She approaches everything with this dedication and focus. She tends to be a perfectionist as well and sets these very high standards not only for herself, but for others too. That sort of belief makes her very methodical, right? She's a planner. She's not someone who just flies by the seat of her pants. And lastly, she becomes a little bit domineering, right? She's a little bit of a know-it-all and can be kind of bossy. Okay, so now we're getting to the very last stage of this inverted character building process. You know the core belief of your character, you know something contradictory about that belief, you know their personality and actions and personality. Now, and only now, can we actually drill down and get to the details. This is what most authors start with when they're creating a character, but in our process, it's going to be very last. So here are 3 details you should figure out about your character at this point. 1, a mannerism. 2, give your character a speech pattern. And 3, give your character an appearance. So let's start by giving your character a mannerism. Now, the trouble with most character mannerisms is that they don't reveal anything about the character. They're just this anonymous action that virtually anyone could take in the world, and it would mean the exact same thing. For example, running one's hand through one's hair in frustration. You see this gesture all the time in books, and it doesn't tell you anything about the character. It's zero character building. It is an anonymous action that anyone could take. Your goal is to create a mannerism that reflects the deeper values and core belief systems of your character. So let's look at an example from Gillian Flynn, her book Sharp Objects. And we're gonna look at this amazing mannerism the mother has. My mother hushed me, looking away. When my mother is piqued, she has a peculiar tell. She pulls at her eyelashes. Sometimes they come out. This is a mannerism that is uniquely suited to this character. The eyelash pulling shows her as believing that bodies are something that need to be controlled and that bodies are something that need to be disciplined rather than accepted. Also, eyelash pulling is like a very gentle metaphor for the type of self-harm that goes on in this novel, and there's a lot, including the daughter's cutting. And the way she treats her own body through things like eyelash pulling mirrors the way that she treats her daughter's bodies as well. It's a mannerism which perfectly matches who she is as a character. Now, I've actually written a whole blog post more about mannerisms, so if you're stuck on mannerisms, you want some more ideas for fodder and you don't know what your character could possibly do, I'll put a link in the description to that Mannerism post so you can read it and be inspired. The second thing we're going to use your character's core belief to figure out is give your character a speech pattern. So Andy Weir is a fantastic sci-fi writer. You probably know him from stuff like Hail Mary, but he also wrote The Martian, which became a movie with Matt Damon. And Matt Damon plays a character called Mart Watney, who I think his core belief could be summarized as science and rationality can solve seemingly impossible problems. Now, if that was his only core belief, I think the way he would speak would be very boring in the book, to be honest. We'd get a whole bunch of scientific jargon and like 1/20th of the people reading would actually understand it. But that's not his only core belief, right? There's also a contradictory core belief that he thinks that if he's going to survive, humor is going to be just as important as science and rationality. So how does that core belief and the contradictory core belief manifest in a speech? Well, it's this strange mix of both science and humor. On one hand, you have like straight up science passages like this one. All right, so I need to create a closed loop oxygen system. That means I'll have to use the Martian atmosphere, which is mostly CO2, and somehow convert it to breathable oxygen. The best way to do that is through electrolysis. But then he also has lines which are definitely tongue-in-cheek. Luckily, in the history of humanity, nothing bad has ever happened from lighting hydrogen on fire. Oh, the Hindenburg called, it wants its explosion back. He also does this great thing where he mixes low diction, which is humor, right, with high diction, the science part of things. I tested the brackets by hitting them with rocks. That's the low diction part, right? Here comes the high diction part. This kind of sophistication is what we interplanetary scientists are known for. And then sometimes he mixes up his scientific jargon with sort of like lowbrow language as well.
I'm gonna have to science the out of this.
If you can use your character's core belief to figure out some sort of nuance or interesting contradiction about the way that they speak, your book's gonna be brilliant. And lastly, we come to the place where most people actually start, right? The character's appearance. But we're ending here for a very specific purpose, because I think once you know all this other stuff about this character, their core beliefs, their backstory, their personality, how they speak, then and only then are you ready to figure out what they look like. Now, obviously, there are some aspects of your character's appearance that don't really depend on stuff like backstory or core beliefs, right? Hair color, eye color, like, no. You can just choose those. But there are some aspects of your character's core belief that do affect a good deal about their appearance. Look at Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger Games. She has a core belief that practical survival trumps social niceties. So that sort of thing is reflected in her appearance. She has a very practical braid, which is good when you're running around and people are trying to kill you. She has very utilitarian clothing, right? This isn't like fanciness like all those people in the Capitol. Or look at a character like Miss Havisham from Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. She has this core belief that heartbreak stops time. So when she gets jilted at the altar, she spends the rest of her days in that wedding dress, letting it get more and more tattered, letting it yellow. Her appearance is frozen in time, kind of like her emotional state. Or look at Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, in which you have a character like Patrick Bateman. He fundamentally believes that control and power and wealth are the most important things in life. And so he thinks that aging and physical decay end up being signs of weakness. What that means is he develops this insane skincare ritual, and that he meticulously styles his hair, and that his clothing is organized by color, and his perfectly manicured nails are checked compulsively. His appearance is how he manifests power in the world, and it also matches his compulsive personality and his very shallow superficiality. Okay, I hope that was helpful, me walking you through this process of inverted character creation, and check out one of my other videos on character creation if you need some more help.